All right, so first can go ahead and do a land acknowledgement.
Relationship between people and land. That Native people recognize that everything has a spirit: plants, animals, insects, mountains, and water. Native American identity is deeply tied to these, and they are referenced and respected in our culture, our creation stories, healing ceremonies, and celebrations. Please keep this in mind as I share the land acknowledgement with you. So we acknowledge and respect that the land we are on today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples. This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other native tribes. We recognize the Indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties nations have to their traditional homelands are renewed and reaffirmed. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a video that we produced like 2 years ago. Really talks, speaks volumes in terms of what we mean when we address the land acknowledgement. Ty Smith was the gentleman who delivered that acknowledgement. He's the director of the Native American Cultural Center here at CSU, and TWP, or Trees, Water, and People, really we emphasize a lot of uplifting and amplifying Native voices here locally as well as across the nation. So we always start our presentations, any meetings, any type of informal or even formal and informal meetings with the land acknowledged as respect to the first peoples of these lands. A little bit of background about who I am. Again, I'm from Santo Domingo, Pueblo, New Mexico. I graduated from Colorado State University with a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Business, so proud RAM. From 2016 to 2018, my first journey in life in an adult form was working for the USDA Farm Service Agency. I worked there for 2 years, both in New Mexico and South Dakota, primarily supporting low-income, marginalized, and displaced communities around access to resources and financial gain through the U.S. government. But then I realized, like my heart really didn't belong in the government sector due to budget cuts, due to just all kind of politics and bureaucracy. And in 2019, I found Trees, Water, and People, and I've been with them ever since. I'm really glad I found this organization, or this organization found me. I'm very humbled and privileged to be working with a great group of colleagues and friends at this organization. So my presentation today is going to, first we're going to cover Trees, Water, and People, give you all a little bit of overview of who we are, what we do, and why we started as an organization. And we're going to talk a little bit about the engagement model into how we work with tribes both domestically and internationally in Central America. Then I'm going to go and walk you all through a little bit about the Indigenous Lands Program, which I'm the director of. We work with several tribes, in the Southwest and South Dakota, and here in Southwest Colorado. Then we're going to get into more of the meat and potatoes of the presentation, talking about collaborations and establishing healthy relationships, such as how do you first start or build a relationship? How do you sustain those relationships, and then evaluating those as well. And then we'll have a quick reflection and wrap up at the end before we go into our Q&A. First off, Trees, Water, and People. At Trees, Water, and People, our mission is to improve people's lives by helping communities to protect, conserve, and manage their natural resources for which their long, well-term depends. We are guided by the philosophy that the best way to fight climate change and really actively involve people in these projects is to directly design and implement projects where they have a say and that they're actively involved for their economic and livelihood developments. So this is our engagement model that we utilize at TWP. I'm sure Jim probably recognizes this. So as you can see, the spectrum here goes from the left from inform to empower. Inform is very low level, no public engagement, no community involvement. That's really the lowest form of that's really a very extractive model of research that you want to, that happens across the globe is, you just inform people, but you never get perspective or feedback from them. And then if you move to the right, you get to consulting, you get involvement, collaboration, and empowerment. But for trees, water, and people, we come in right here between collaboration and empowerment. Our resources and our support really goes to amplifying, again, those indigenous voices, getting them directly involved into projects based around land management and stewardship, because they're the ones who are on the front lines. They understand the lands better than we do. They're constantly getting affected by climate change to a very large degree. And so it's really important to have them collaborate in these projects, but also uplifting them by empowering them to start sustaining and practicing sovereignty to the fullest right. Our Indigenous Lands Program, we are kind of like the younger brother of Trees, Water, and People, but then we've grown tremendously over the years. We first got started in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, working with longtime partner Henry Red Cloud of Red Cloud Renewables. Well, our vision as a program is to support community-led regenerative natural resource projects that improve the economic, social, and cultural lifeways of tribal peoples in the U.S. And we have three philosophies that guide our work every day. The first one is to engage with tribes to restore and sustain indigenous ancestral lands that have been affected by natural disasters. And I say ancestral lands because tribes are now in a position where they can start co-managing public lands that were taken away from them with the federal government. Just recently, a couple months ago, the National Park Service and the Forest Department of Interior announced that tribes are going to be playing a bigger role in protecting public lands across the country, which is why I state ancestral lands instead of tribal lands. Second philosophy is to promote stewardship practices of indigenous peoples for inclusion and sustainability. For so long, indigenous peoples' voices have not been heard in regards to stewardship projects and land management projects. So TWP helps amplify those voices so we can start including how they've been stewarding their lands for millennia. And then lastly, we promote and value the transmission of traditional ecological knowledge so that tribes can conserve and protect their indigenous cultural lifeways. For me, the bottom one is probably the most important out of the three, because for many tribes, they're oral. They pass knowledge through oral systems, oral traditions, and that's very important because language and the passage of knowledge is what really is a form of medicine. It's a form of survival for many tribes. So that's again, for me, it hits deep because I myself come from a community that's really strong in oral passage of knowledge because we don't write our language. It's something that we protect and we want to conserve for the future generations. Here is the people, place, knowledge, and values loop model that helps guide us in our everyday work as well. This was not developed by TWP. I believe it was developed by a professor out of University of Arizona, if I remember correctly. But it really illustrates how Native Americans are interconnected with everything. This holistic model shows that from the people to the place to the knowledge, the worldview, and the decisions are all interconnected with one. There's not a separate system. It's all one entire model and one entire system, one entire traditional value system that Native Americans, utilize and practice every day. And to the left here, we have some terminology that I thought, will be imperative for you all to know, because as graduate students, you are going to be entering the real world here soon. And when you all are doing research, I think these key terms are going to be very instrumental to how you do your research. So pro-Indigenous, for Indigenous people. That's kind of more of like a non-Native person going into a community and telling the tribe, I'm gonna do this research for you. Para-Indigenous, with Indigenous people. And then lastly, per-Indigenous, that's, by Indigenous people. So for us, we use these three terms, strategically with the work we do, with the projects we implement in tribal communities, and we really want to emphasize the importance of per-Indigenous, and that's kind of goes back to our mission statement as an organization entirely. So some of the project focus areas that we do for the Indigenous Lands Program is, reforestation and post-fire watershed recovery, healthy rangelands, and then riparian restoration. All three project focus areas were not handpicked or selected by TWP. These projects are born from the community, within the community. When we develop relationships with tribes, we listen and we see what their needs are and like how climate change or natural disturbances have impacted their lands. And then we create a strategic plan with them focusing on each of these focus areas. Reforestation and post-fire watershed recovery is probably about 50% of what we do within the Indigenous Lands Program. Some of our partners, is the Tri Pueblo Coalition, which is a consortium of 3 New Mexico pueblos, which are the pueblos of Cochiti, Jemez, and Santo Domingo, working collectively together on larger landscape scale transboundary restoration projects within the greater East Jemez Mountains region. Then we got Red Cloud Renewable, Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, the Nature Conservancy of New Mexico, East Jemez Landscape Futures Collective. This collective was born from the 2011 Las Conchas wildfire in New Mexico that decimated, over 100,000 acres, across federal, private, and tribal lands. So it was a collective of tribes, NGOs, federal and state agencies coming together to address post-fire mitigation plans. And then we have the Quivira Coalition, New Mexico State Forestry Division, and Colorado State Forestry Nursery. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start getting into more of the meat and potatoes on this discussion of collaborative relationships and how to develop healthy reciprocal relationships with trust. So my first question to you all, is what is a collaborative relationship? Can anyone give me a quick definition of what, in their mind or in their knowledge, what a collaborative relationship is? Yeah.
I think of it as when 2 or more people or parties or groups come together to try to solve a problem or address a challenge that no one could fix or address by themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty good. Yeah, thank you. And Lily? Awesome. So here is a textbook definition of what a collaborative relationship is. It's when 2 or more people or groups work together in order to accomplish a common goal. Very straightforward, but then let's think a little deeper. Let's, kind of exercise our brain muscles a little bit more. How do you define a collaboration with a tribal nation? Except there's no wrong answers. It's just to challenge you all as graduate level students to think about collaboration.
In my mind, it has to be a more formal government-to-government relationship that's not just like Corey and I get together to figure out how to solve water in the world. And it has to acknowledge sort of past roles and power imbalances. And be authentic about our commitment to current and future roles and distribution of power.
Perfect. I like that. I think you hit it really well in terms of when you said it has to be authentic. Power distribution has to be equal and reciprocal. So thank you again for voicing. So here's my definition, or what I think a collaborative relationship with the tribe means. It's a collaboration between a sovereign tribal nation and a non-tribal entity built on respect, reciprocity, trust, and transparency to accomplish a common goal. And for most part, these are very unique, and oftentimes for the very first time, like a non-tribal entity will want to create a healthy relationship with the tribe that respects, their knowledge systems, is willing to learn and share cultural systems, but also promote equitable participatory measures. So again, it goes back to respect, reciprocity, and trust. So why is building healthy relationships important for collaborations? We're in a day of age, where collaborations is bigger than anything. We talk about effective collaborations, and why, in academia, it's important to be able to be successful on large scale restoration or stewardship projects. But I'm curious to hear you all, like, why do you all think building collaborations is important? Okay.
I think there's something to be said about seeking a healthy relationship because it acknowledges the past harms that have been done to tribal nations by non-tribal entities. So there is an acknowledgement of that and a seeking of doing better and sort of taking the lead of the tribal nation.
Thanks, yeah. Anyone else?
I think building a healthy relationship can at least attempt to kind of dismantle the power imbalance.
Nice, thank you.
Hey, Dr. Colorado.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Rob Shore. I work at the Colorado Natural Heritage Program here on campus.
Hi.
Hi. I think one of the things that healthy relationships kind of build is a long-term partnership. The trust can contribute to a broader window of conservation and habitat regeneration.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, I think you hit it spot on when you said long-term. If we're thinking about long-term projects, collaboration is key, especially when you're trying to leverage funding, leverage resources, information, data. Those collaborations are going to be vital to the success of a project, if that's on tribal lands or even non-tribal lands. So that's why, as graduate students and even for practitioners such as myself, it's important that, we start developing these healthy relationships with each other, even within your own network. It's okay to start small, have humble beginnings, and then grow from it. But, to give you all a little bit more information, healthy relationships create the foundation, and I'm coming from a tribal perspective of our Indigenous lands program, it creates the foundation where tribes and stakeholders can implement effective and sustainable land management and stewardship practices. The collaboration incorporates community participation with more focused activities and community needs. Kind of going back to that spectrum I showed earlier, where collaboration empowerment has more public engagement and community involvement. Collaboration opens up those doors because you're now getting feedback, you're getting perspective, you're listening to the voices and to the people, within these communities when it comes to stewardship projects. There's a lot of mutual gain, meaningful interactions that can come from healthy relationships and collaborations for a long-term plan. You build and maintain those productive relationships for long-term. You don't want to create a partnership or relationship for one project and be done. In the field of sustainability or stewardship conservation, partnerships can be forever, for perpetuity. And so it's important to think about why developing those healthy relationships up front are very important. And it's, again, the first step in any engagement with not just tribal nations, but with any NGO, federal, state agency, conservation entity, organization, etc. Developing those healthy relationships is the first key. So now we're going to talk about how do you build these relationships with tribes.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
About internal collaborations within the tribe.
Excuse me, what was the first one? Internal
collaborations within the tribe.
Internal collaborations.
Are they very smooth?
Yes and no. Each tribe is different. Native Americans are not a monolithic group. Each tribe and each peoples have their own specific set of traditional systems, values, customs, etc. So it varies from community to community. You know, I've seen communities that have strong internal interactions and coalitions that have worked effectively, and then I've seen some tribes that have not. It really goes back to, and I'm going to touch base here soon about the ways you develop these relationships is through respect and like really not interfering with, you know, the process of it.
So within your process, do you deal with that as well, or you just deal with the relationships from the two outside entities?
Mostly on the outside, you know, developing a relationship with the tribe from an outside perspective. But then most of the time, those internal relationships are built by themselves. Once, you know, if we work with one department, say, for instance, the natural resource department of the tribe, and other departments see the success we've been having, the language preservation office, you know, the water quality specialist office, et cetera, will want to work with us, and they start to kind of be proactive with each other a lot more than they would before. But TWP's approach is really not to put ourselves too deep in there, but, you know, really going back to that spectrum, empower these other internal departments to start working and collaborating with each other. So the way you want to build healthy relationships with tribes is you don't want to take a linear approach. You want to be open to listening and opening to really kind of sit down with tribes and hear them out, like what are their needs, you know, and the first part of that is respect. Maybe going in with doing some research beforehand, because as I mentioned, each tribe is different. Each one has different procedures, protocols, and epistemologies intact to how they govern themselves. And along the ways, you're gonna hit some roadblocks. It's not always gonna be easy peasy creating a relationship, from the ground. That's why it's always great to be humble. Start small and grow from there. And it's gonna take time. Time. It took us about 2 years to develop our first relationship with the tribe in New Mexico. Before we implemented any type of post-fire recovery project on the ground. And that's really allowing the tribe to have those internal discussions with each other to see if an outside organization such as TWP can come in and work with them on land management issues. Yeah, so going back to it, the one key part I missed, which was my very first point, was respecting tribal sovereignty. Tribes here in the U.S. are sovereign nations, meaning they have the right to self-govern themselves and have the right to make decisions what's best for their communities and for their lands and natural resources. You want to create those non-linear fluid approaches. Don't come in with the Western science approach of an extractive model. Be willing to, listen, sit down with the community and with the people and hear them out. Having honest face-to-face conversations. I can't tell you how many times we drove to New Mexico the first 2 years to sit down with the governors, with the war chief and the natural resources staff, and having those conversations to create a relationship with them. And then again, just takes time. Sorry, I'm just trying to navigate both here.
Just cue me when you're ready.
It takes time, and you want to launch those collaborations with humble beginnings, and not rushing it. Again, be patient, be flexible. You're going to be put in situations where you're going to be challenged to be like, how are you going to do this research? Is it going to affect us? Is it going to affect our way of life? Is it going to bring more harm or more good to my community and to my people? So those are the questions, or answers you got to have in advance, because we've been in those positions and situations before, and you want to be honest and clear about upfront with the tribal leaders, like how the project or the work you want to do on tribal lands is going to benefit them. All right.
Next slide.
Yep. And lastly, respect. I can't emphasize this anymore. Respecting tribal sovereignty, respecting they have the right to self-govern themselves, and respecting that each tribe is different and they have their own creation stories, their own knowledge systems, and their own epistemologies when it comes to being a people in this country. So next comes, once you build those relationships, you're like, you met with the people, you met with the tribal leadership, you now have a vision or a path you all want to create in terms of working together on land management or stewardship projects. Next step is like, how do you maintain those relationships? So like, you create that initial relationship, 2 years later, you finish up that first round of projects that you guys, promised to work with each other. For example, say reforestation, but the tribe has bigger views. They want to do something more down the road. So you want to think about, how do I maintain an honest, open relationship with these tribes? So sustaining collaborative relationships. You want to first develop a strategic plan, long-term, preferably with the tribe, just listening in, like drafting it up as it goes. It's important to recognize that a plan that you develop up front, during the initial conversations may evolve, may change down the road, but it's good to just always have the initial strategic plan with you when you're working with tribes. That's centering tribal priorities. Again, you don't want to come in and you don't want to be that white savior individual or organization, or bring that type of concept into a tribal reservation, because they're not gonna like it. They're gonna boot you out it's faster than you can say a word. So you always want to center the tribal priorities. If that's reforestation, riparian, if that's water issues, if that's rangelands, always center their priorities when it comes to developing these strategic plans. Again, respecting intellectual property. Intellectual property meaning traditional ecological knowledge, meaning stories, oral traditions, life ways. You don't want to tell them like that it's different and that it has to be changed. You want to respect the way they live, the way they practice themselves as a people, and the way they do stewardship projects on the ground. You want to establish goals, timelines, and expectations. You want to have some type of integrity to these partnerships or relationships that you develop. It can't just be free-floating. You want it to be structured. That way there's some reciprocity in exchanges that can take place between you as an individual or as an organization with the tribe. And most importantly, you're going to have to execute approval and agreement documents with tribes. Being sovereign nations, they're going to they want to exercise their sovereignty. So don't be alarmed, or don't think any different if they ask you, we're going to have to put an agreement or approval document in place before you want to do any research or any type of conservation work on tribal lands or within the communities. You want to build capacity along the way. For a lot of the tribal partners that we work with, they're very short-staffed. You have most times it might be a director and an admin assistant and a grant writer or a technician. So they are very understaffed, funded, and so along the ways you want to find creative solutions to build capacity for each relationship you have with the tribe, and that doesn't always have to mean just a natural resource, but within the community as well. Empowering people, empowering youth to want to go to higher education and become, foresters, become water quality specialists, etc. That's where capacity building comes in key when you're sustaining these relationships. And then you want to adopt co-learning and ownership principles. You want to allow ownership to take place within the tribe. When you do a project on tribal lands, it doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to trees, water, and people. It belongs to the community, which is why it's important to go back to that respect piece of it. And then you want to learn along the way. You want to absorb as much knowledge from them, and it being reciprocal, because they'll be open to, understanding how Western science, plays a critical role in the advancement with technology, such as GIS mapping, such as modeling, evaluation, etc. Because those are some of the technology pieces that are not commonly seen in tribal communities. So you always want to have that mindset of co-learning and ownership principles take place. And then lastly, you want to be transparent and be accountable. If you as a researcher or you as a graduate student want to work with the tribe and notice that I may have screwed up on an agreement form, I screwed up, I wasn't clear that what I want to do with, my research, or there's something that, shifted within my research goals, it's okay to be accountable. I think that's going to really just even further develop a healthy relationship with them. There have been plenty of times where my team, we shifted our program focus or project focus with a certain tribe and let them know that, we understand that, we weren't clear up front, but we want to take accountability and let you all know, here's the new direction we want to take it. And so that really will help sustain a healthy relationship with the tribe because they see that you're being honest and transparent with them. And so now evaluating relationships. It's important to evaluate your relationships or your projects. And this goes, as well with non-tribal groups as well. I think it's put in a position of collaboration where you want to know how effective your work is with this certain individual or with this certain group. So some tools that I want to recommend for you all in regards to evaluating collaborative relationships is first, you want to have it face-to-face. You don't want to, if you notice that a project is not up to par with the partner or a tribal community, you don't want to send it through email. You don't want to call them because that's only going to damage, your relationship with them a lot more. So you want to make sure you take time and schedule a meeting to do a face-to-face evaluation exchange. And that evaluation could be just, out in the field, like, such as this photo here, talking about here's what worked, here's what didn't, here's the survival rate of, the seedlings we planted. So you could just, be in an environment, preferably in their community, so that they know that they are in a safe space and that you're not overwhelming them with outside jurisdictions and policies that they're not used to. You want to exercise performance audits with tribes. We actually just did that internally at Trees, Water, and People, where we went individually with each partner and chatted with them about what's working. How can we improve this part of the project? How's our communication? How's our leveraging resources or sharing resources working effectively for us as a partnership or a relationship? So it's okay to ask them, can we do an audit? Because it's only going to benefit us for long-term development of our relationship. And some of that is analyze the data and impact. If you're collecting data, share it with them. But it's also important to mention here, if you are collecting data on tribal lands, it has to go back to the approval process of it, that there's an agreement in place of how data can be shared outside of the tribal communities. You want to discuss, is our relationship meeting expectations or goals? Or are they underperforming or are they overperforming? Have that open end conversation with them. Then you want it to be reciprocal. You give feedback to them, ask for feedback in return, and if they have questions or if you have questions, give them that space. We are happy to answer any questions you have, so that there is that reciprocal communication line between you and a tribe or a tribal department. And lastly, be transparent. Be clear about what you want to gain from this. Be clear about how it's gonna further develop and further strengthen your relationship with them. And then lastly, you want to reflect on lessons learned. Lessons learned, goes back to all of this that I just presented, analyzing the data and impacts, being reciprocal, transparent, and then just really writing it out. Having some type of tangible form of communication available will be great as well. Because there's been plenty of times where on our end where we've worked with tribes, they want to see something written out. give us an explanation of like what has worked and what hasn't. So always reflect on the lessons learned part of a relationship that you create with the tribe. So yeah, let's quickly wrap it all up in regards to what we walked through today when creating and developing relationships. First off, healthy relationships build strong collaborations and intertribal coalitions. In New Mexico, we first developed a relationship with the Pueblo of Santo Domingo. 6 months later, we helped facilitate the formulation of the Tri-Pueblo Coalition, which is Cochiti Pueblo, Jemez Pueblo, and Santo Domingo Pueblo. So once a tribe sees that an organization or individual that is a non-tribal entity actually does, have cares and respects what their tribe's vision or their priorities are, they're going to want to work with you. So that's what I mean by healthy relationships build strong collaborations and intertribal coalitions. Respect is the key ingredient in establishing these relationships. I can't stress that enough, respecting their tribal sovereignty, respecting their protocols, their epistemologies, their creation stories, etc. And each tribe is different. So you want to be flexible and you want to be prepared, maybe even doing research ahead of time of the tribe that you want to work with, so you know what type of system you're going into. And then lastly, be an Indigenous-led project. Don't let Western science take its role and push these tribal communities to adapt the Western model. Tell them to sit down. Be like, yo, let's sit down. Let's let the Indigenous people take the reins and drive this project. So I hope that these kind of 3 key takeaways and wrapping it all up can help you all as graduate students as are ready to take on the real world here soon, especially working in natural resource community-based or with community-based natural resources projects and programs after your time here at CSU. So that's all I have. So I want to say thank you for allowing me to present a little bit about our work at Trees, Water, and People, and kind of guiding you all to establish healthy relationships with tribes. Here's my contact information, this is my email, and then my colleague, who is our GIS and watershed manager at TWP. So, thank you.
Thank you. So we are going to shift into our Q&A discussion portion, and thank you for leaving time for that and just being so generous with how much you shared from your experience. So what we'll do is we'll open up the Jamboard and show that you're welcome to choose your favorite questions or comments to build from. And then also folks can unmute, and we're getting a lot of thanks in the chat. Thank you to you all. If I might be able to start us off, I have a question I'd like to start us off with as I get this going. So yeah, my question is, I've really been seeing this movement happening where, and everyone in class has access to the Jamboard as well, but where there's been this growing movement, or I guess realization of folks recognizing that their engagement has really lacked any tribal engagement, tribal partnerships, or that their research projects or management efforts are really in deficit in terms of Indigenous knowledges and experiences that could inform that. So I'm getting a lot of folks reaching out that have never had that engagement, and they're wanting to know, where do I begin? And so I'm wondering if that's something that you're experiencing through your practitioner role, and also what kind of advice are you giving folks, and where are you pointing them at that stage?
Yeah, it's a really good question when it comes to like, when is the perfect time to engage with tribes. In my opinion, it should have happened yesterday or years ago. But I really let me think about that quickly of how I can address it. Yeah, the engagement process is very unique. It's gonna really further develop, as time goes around the type of community, tribal communities that you are engaged or working with and developing these relationships. And yes, there's a growing movement, especially with this current administration, of being more inclusive and equitable, to listening to just not people of color and marginalized communities, but really women too. Women are taking a big step in the fight in climate change, in the fight of sustainability and regenerative work in both on tribal lands and off tribal lands. So it's always good to acknowledge that when you reach out to a tribe, that tribe may have already been engaged with a different non-tribal entity or organization, but that you can also come in more as a supplementing, organization or source to help them, guide them even down the road and get that stronger. So my recommendation would be is just, seek out, be curious, seek out those communities. It doesn't have to be a tribal community. Like here in Fort Collins, there's a strong Native American community, and they're fighting to have more access to the land here in the Poudre Canyon and locally. So that might be a great group to, get your feet wet and start small again, going back to humble beginnings before taking on a bigger role in a tribal community and a tribal context. Because then you're dealing with the sovereign nation, you're dealing with agreements, with paperwork, and a lot of sometimes stress. So it's always good to seek out what's local, or what's, who are the groups that are acting at a local capacity to do natural resource management and stewardship projects. And it doesn't have to be tribal communities. There are other, marginalized minority groups, across the world that are facing similar issues and challenges that tribal communities are. They've been displaced due to, war, to famine, genocide, political pressure. So a lot of this really resonates to a lot of people, again, who have faced those in past conflicts and past years. So my recommendation is you got to take the first initiative, because tribes, are going to be there. They're going to want to work with you. They're going to want to find creative ways to, protect their way of life, but work around creative solutions to better their society and better sustain their lands. But it really involves us as, people who are privileged, people who have resources to internet, to data, to, models to help prolong their livelihoods of as Indigenous peoples.
Thank you. So anyone in class or anyone joining remotely? And then James, if you see a question that you'd like to respond to.
Yeah, so I'll just do the first one. Instead of running to the nearest Indigenous community and saying, hey, let's work together, what can we do to center minoritized folk and break down power systems? Yeah, that one, you can, what I would recommend is, again, going in and listening. You don't have to say a single word, at these meetings. You can absorb everything, listen in, like what the priorities are, what the needs are. And then after the meeting, maybe start penciling down, like here's some of my ideas on ways that I can support this organization or this group, wanting to be more proactive in the work that, around natural resources and community-based stewardship. And that comes with, a lot of going back to respect. You want to respect, what the community is, what they're doing, and then be an ally. You don't want to be, I'm going to take charge. I got connections to all these resources, but then just asking respectfully, can I speak? I think I have a lot of value and a lot of knowledge that I can, present to this community or to this group that, may be beneficial. And if that group doesn't think it's beneficial, you got to just take it in and say that, like, thank you for giving me this floor and the space to, talk as a non-tribal person about what's going on, and then just, take it from there. Because you don't want to throw a fit. You don't want to say that, like, oh, I've presented my thoughts, but you don't want to accept it. Why not? It doesn't go like that, especially in tribal contexts. So you want to, come in respectfully. You want to absorb as much knowledge and really listen in to what the community needs and priorities are. For people learning about the injustice in the system for the first time, what are some key topics to start with? Decolonializing the mind, so to speak. This one's, I got a lot to say that I probably shouldn't say on video. Decolonializing, let's see. I guess it's just really being humble about it, recognizing that, if you have never fully understood or never really got a full understanding of what tribal communities are, who the people are, their systems, their beliefs, it's okay to recognize that. It's okay to say that, like, I've never had the pleasure or the privilege or honor to talk about tribal context or tribal epistemologies. Can you teach me, or maybe not teach, can you educate me the best ways, the best practices to really educate my mind when it comes to decolonizing, myself, my community, my identity? And so it all goes back to education, reading, instead of reading a book about how Western science has, developed the 21st century. Instead, go to a book that talks about Indigenous sciences, Indigenous stewardship. Change it up a little bit. Those are ways that, can help decolonialize a person's mind, the way they think, the way they behave, their attitude. So that would be my recommendation is, don't always be caught in just that the Western science is the right way to go. Western science, sure has, really developed our way of our livelihoods really well, but then Indigenous science, has always been there as well. It's a power that lives within the earth. It's a power that lives within the Indigenous peoples, and that's why for a lot of Indigenous peoples, they protect it really well. It's in our language, it's in our songs, it's in our creation stories. And going back to the land acknowledgement, when Ty Smith addressed it, we see everything as a living spirit. So if you see it that way, that's the first step to decolonizing your mind, the way you think. And last one, have you witnessed a Western science team or researcher reflect and practice settler responsibility and choose not to do certain type of research or enter certain spaces? Practice. Yes, I have. It was, so to answer this question, like, if I ever witnessed a Western science team, practice more settler responsibility and chose not to research in a more practical, ethical way, I have. But this was before my time working with Trees, Water, and People. It was when I was working with the USDA Farm Service Agency, where we were conducting surveys based on income levels of tribal communities. Instead of, consulting with the tribal government and the people to see if it was okay to do this survey, we never took that approach. We went in using the government, like using that rightful power from the government to be able to exercise a program or project so we can get better information when it comes to income and capital when in the farming and agricultural spectrum. So I have, and that was one practice that a tribal government did not like. They actually did sue the government for interfering without written approval or consulting with them, and that put a lot of heat on our office in New Mexico because we chose to take more of a Western science approach versus a traditional relationship development approach with that tribal community.
Dr. Calabaza, it's Rob Shore again from the Colorado Natural Heritage Program. I'll probably follow up with you directly about this, but my interests are in riparian conservation for some of the endangered species that we have here in the Southwest. And because there's a lot of interest in riparian ecosystem conservation, I wanted to ask this question out loud. Are there granting opportunities that we can collaboratively apply for with Indigenous nations to help them be in control of not the project, but also the funding for the project so that they have the direction? So I guess the question is, how do we help them attain the funds to do this kind of work and then take a back seat for how they want to do that work?
Great question. And yeah, thanks so much for bringing the idea of working with tribes around riparian restoration. So we are actually actively working with the Ute Mountain Ute tribe in Southwest Colorado on certain riparian projects. And that's, invasive weed control, tamarisk removal, revegetation of certain grasses, and also revegetation of traditional fruit-bearing trees such as chokecherry, silver buffleberry, etc. And during those conversations we've had with them, we're starting to really broaden our horizon on funding. Our relationship with them started with seed funding, like, let's test it out. Let's see how this partnership or relationship develops over a 2-year span. So we're now in a great position where we are targeting big federal government grants such as, through the BLM, through the WCS. I know they're not government funded, but WCS is a big grantor when it comes to land management and sustainability. But, I guess kind of going to your question is like, how do, as an outside organization, how do we take that back seat and let the tribe run or drive the car? It's really, creating that relationship with them and understanding that they have the capacity to take this on. We are actually drafting up a proposal with Ute Mountain Ute as we speak, where they are going to be the lead applicant for the GoCo proposal, and TWP is going to be more of a stakeholder to it. They have worked, with various, water organizations and water-based agencies in the area for a couple years now, and so they have a lot of baseline data, that have come from these projects that they are willing to, use that for an application to strengthen the purpose of this project, but utilizing TWP's approach to developing these healthy reciprocal relationships with tribes. So I guess to wrap it all up, it's important to recognize that tribes, we're fortunate Ute Mountain Ute has a really well-established and polished environmental programs. And so they have the capacity to take it on, and, allowing us to empower them and take the ropes, and we just, be the backseat support for them. But I would love to, follow up more with you after this. My email, is just james@treeswaterandpeople.org.
So I do want to thank everyone, number one, for your patience with the technology. Not our specialty, but here we are. And I want to thank the Forest and Rangeland Stewardship Department. They provided support for James to join us for this guest talk. And we also have a gift bundle for you from the Natural Resources College. Some water bottle, bandana, and a bag might be helpful for your field work. And we're just so appreciative of the really grounded wisdom and experience that you've shared with us. I constantly learn from you and the efforts of you and your collaborators and tribal partners. So I'm really grateful that you're here in our local community doing this work. And let's all take a moment to give home our thanks to you.
Thank you.